What's up everybody, Happy New Year, and I hope you're all doing very well. I recently discovered an awesome plugin for After Effects that I wanted to share with you all, and that is a paid plugin called Superpose 2. It's not the cheapest app, but it's very cool and a massive time saver for one of the more dull tasks often required in VFX and even photography. So the premise is to remove movement automatically from your footage and to provide a clean plate with minimal manual work required. It's not perfect, but I think it is a taste of the amazing software that lies ahead. If you are interested, you can grab a trial on aescripts.com, and you'll also want to get some of your own footage to test out as well. I have a collection of plates that work pretty well and a few that don't work particularly well, just to demonstrate some of the weaknesses of the plugin. So let's take this one of a rainy forest. Simply make a new comp and drag on the Superpose 2 effect. So the first limitation is that this only works with lock-offs. So still camera movements only. If the camera is moving around, then you'd want to stabilize the area that you want to work with and then reverse the stabilization later if needed. This shot is a lock-off though, so we can skip that step. So let's say we want to remove all the rain. Well, to do this by hand would honestly suck. You'd probably just want to take a still into Photoshop and then get to work on clone stamping or other paint out techniques, but it's still a very tedious process. But this is quite easy to do with Superpose. So a quick rundown of the settings. The start-end frames are simply the area in which to look for movement. Every nth frame is how many frames to analyze. So 1 means analyze every frame, 3 means analyze every third frame. Divergence is a measure of when the algorithm detects 2 pixel values as different. So the manual says the default values are usually good, but if the lighting fluctuates throughout the shot, then you might want to bump this up a little bit. If it's too high though, then it'll look kind of blurry, like bad frame blending. And if you're at 8 bits per channel, you'll want to use a higher divergence value, but if you're in AE, then I always suggest using a minimum of 16 BPC anyway. So that's what we'll be using for this. Lastly, the rating range is used to determine which pixel is kept in the final image. So 1 means whatever the algorithm ranks as the best pixel. You can bump this up a little bit, but like with divergence, you could get some weird ghosting if it's too high. So just try these with the default values, except you will need to adjust the start and end frames. All right, so let's change these and let it work. Now, this isn't the fastest process, especially for 4K, but hang tight. And boom, the rain is gone. And now we have a still image that we can save out and re-import back into the comp. So let's say now you wanted to extract the rain. Well, you can do that too. You could use a difference mat on a copy, or we could simply subtract the modified plate from the original one, and now you've got just the rain. Now this would need some cleanup, but it could be useful. Like I could see many applications where you might want to extract just the motion and just leave the background, and maybe you want to use just the rain as in a different element, or maybe you want to do something weird where you can just toggle off the rain in the shot. I don't know what you would want it for this specific thing, but I could see many applications for extracting the moving parts of a plate. Let's take a look at a more involved shot. So here the camera is shaking, but it's possible to stabilize and then reverse the stabilization later. So to demonstrate why you have to stabilize, if we just apply Superpose on the original plate, we get something like this, which honestly is pretty cool on its own, but that's not really the point of the software. Let's take that off and warp stabilize this for no motion. So after that is analyzed, you can set the objective to reversible and then apply Superpose. And with a long shot, you don't necessarily need to let it analyze the entire length. As long as every pixel of the background is unobscured at some point within the range that you've set, then you're good. So we can do something like 175 frames and we can still get a good result. So the guy in the background has a few leftover pixels, so you could paint them out with the clone stamp either in After Effects or in Photoshop, or you could just take a different section of the video and then comp it over the top. These are just like standard paint out techniques, so whatever you decide to do is fine. Save out a still and import that back in. This will be much faster to render than leaving on the Superpose effect. And then to reverse the stabilization, you can just copy the warp stabilizer, paste the copy on the still, and then set it to reverse. Then we have to zoom in either with a scale, or you could just use a transform effect. And then we have the final shot, just with no snow and there's no guy in the background. For shots with more motion, you'd have to section off parts of the plate and then stitch multiple stills back together in order to maintain the movement of the camera. Here's a tricky one. So let's say the client is like, hey, there's too many birds in this shot. Well, no problem. You can see where the software can't figure it out and it kind of leaves a muddy area around the lady, but this would be pretty easy to paint out manually. And how about this one? We have even more birds here, like right up in the foreground, and this is the end result just using the default values. And it's pretty good. A bit more to manually touch up, but again, this just saved a ton of time. So this is also really useful for photography. And honestly, this is what I see myself using this for. So you want that shot of a landmark, but without people, like this staircase, for example. So just mask out the stairs, apply superpose just to the steps, and then you have only a few areas to touch up manually. Now, obviously this isn't a replacement for avoiding the crowds and does require you to take a video instead of just a still, but to me this is really cool. And the same thing for this shot of the Great Wall. Now, the biggest issue is that the camera can't move, and obviously every pixel in the background needs to be unobstructed at some point of the video. So with this particular shot, this entire part of the background is a muddy mess, and there's nothing that we can do to alleviate that because the people are blocking that area throughout the entire video. Okay, let's do another one and we'll remove the people from the shot. So instead of applying the effect to the entire plate, we can mask out just the area that we want to retain motion, like in these flowers, then grab the superpose effect, adjust the times, and let it run. Now all the people are gone, but on this one, we do need to increase the nth frame settings to prevent the windows from getting too muddy. This would also require animating the masks to make sure that the shadows on the wall and the flowers don't get cut off. We could also break this into sections and have separate parts with different settings, but as just a really quick test, did a pretty good job. Now, this shot needs stabilization because the camera is dollying backwards, and to preserve the sky and only remove the cars and the pedestrians, you'd need to do some masking and maybe some roto around some of the people, but just grabbing the lower section of the entire plate and running superpose leaves behind quite a bit of cleanup, but it is manageable. Like things like this flagpole, for example, you'd want to definitely fix that or rotoscope the original back in. And then there's this one. Even if the camera isn't moving, there's quite a lot of heat distortion, and the algorithm isn't able to ignore it, and we get these weird black edges around some of the trees. This would require quite a bit of work to preserve the background. And of course, with a moving shot over this beach, even stabilization isn't going to be an option. And if we try to run superpose, we end up with this. So not really a good candidate for superpose. So it's very good for very specific tasks, but it does have its limitations. That said, I could see this advancing to a point where we can detect things like heat distortion and camera movement and selectively remove people and cars and animate objects instead of touching the environment. But when I saw this, I knew I just had to try it out, and I wanted to share my results. So I hope you enjoyed this look at Superpose 2, and let me know if there's other software out there that does a better job of the same thing, or if there's some other cool software that I should take a look at. I recently graduated with a CS degree, and so I'm finding inspiration for my own software dev ideas by discovering cool stuff like this. Anyway, smash that like, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.